The night had folded itself over the world like a thick, heavy cloak, and snowflakes whispered down silently, blanketing the cold airport in a hushed lullaby. The runway lights cast pale circles of warmth on the white expanse, faint halos against the darkness, as if the sky itself was watching over this place where so many journeys began and ended. Among those journeys, one story was about to unfold, a quiet one. Wrapped in frost and fragile breath, outside the terminal, a small figure moved slowly through the falling snow, her footsteps barely marking the untouched ground beneath. Elara Wren was no more than 9, with eyes the shade of winter's quiet sky, deep and searching. She clutched something close to her chest, a bundle wrapped in an old threadbare blanket, frayed at the edges and stained with time. Her fingers, red and trembling, held tight as if the warmth inside might slip away with the next gust of wind. Her breath came in soft clouds, and the cold bit through the thin layers of her coat. She had walked far, farther than most would dare in such weather, leaving behind a place that did not want her. A foster home where she was invisible or worse, unwanted. Her small frame seemed swallowed by the vastness of the airport, the towering windows glowing faintly behind her, filled with the muted chatter of travelers and the endless hum of engines. But Elara moved not towards warmth, nor the bustling crowd inside, but to the edges of the property, where the world was quieter and more still. She was looking for something or someone that had once been promised in whispered stories told by her mother. The man with silver eyes. The protector. The hope she clung to like a fragile thread in a storm. Inside the nearby police kennel, a stir broke the silence. Coda, the lead German shepherd, roused from his rest with a low whine that rolled through the cold air. His fur, thick and dark, seemed to absorb the night around him, eyes sharp and searching despite the years that weighed on his body. He was no ordinary dog. There was something almost human in the way he watched, as if he sensed the unspoken. The unseen tact Captain Silas Vale, a man weathered by time and grief, heard the unusual sounds from his post and frowned. He was no stranger to the silent language of dogsess. The old dog's agitation was different tonight, more urgent, carrying a weight that pulled at Silas's own weary heart. He remembered the day his own daughter vanished, and how Coda had howled that same mournful note, the kind that echoed the ache of loss. Silas stepped outside, his boots crunching on the snow as he scanned the perimeter with sharp eyes. And then he saw her, a tiny figure, half hidden by the swirling snowflakes, stumbling near the frost-kissed fence. The sight stopped him something fragile, lost, but stubbornly alive in the storm. The dog sensed her presence long before she reached them. When Elara finally came into the circle of pale runway lights, the 15 police dogs moved without hesitation. They surrounded her, forming a protective ring, not aggressive, but steady and watchful. Their breath steamed in the cold, chorus of quiet guardianship that wrapped around the girl like a shield. Silas's voice cut through the cold, firm but gentle. Hold the dogs. Yet the animals did not break formation. Their eyes, gleaming with something beyond command, stayed locked on Elara, as if recognizing a kindred spirit, one marked by silence, by grief, and by a longing deeper than words. She looked up at them, her winter-gray eyes wide and uncertain. For a moment, time slowed, the soft snow, the cold air, the quiet breaths of dog and girl mingling into a fragile harmony. It was as if the dogs were whispering to her, telling her she was not alone, that in this frozen night she was seen. A handler moved forward, cautious, but Elara stepped back, trembling. Her small voice was barely audible over the wind. They listen. They know. Silas knelt beside her, his own breath fogging the air between them. "You're safe here," he said softly. His words were more for himself than her, a fragile promise held between broken souls. The bundle shifted in her arms. and from it came a faint, soft whimper, the tiny sound of new life fighting against the cold. A puppy, its fur damp and flecked with snow, curled within the blanket. Ilara's fingers stroked the small creature with a tenderness that made Silas's chest tighten. Inside the warmth of the staff lounge, the world felt distant and muted. Ilara sipped the cocoa Silas offered, her hands still shaking, eyes lost in the flames flickering in the fireplace nearby. Outside, the dogs waited, their forms pressed against the frosted windows, shadows in the snow. Koda sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the girl, a silent sentinel carrying the weight of memories he could no longer forget. Ilara said nothing more that night, but the stillness between them spoke volumes. A connection forged in the cold, a shared understanding of loss and hope. Silas felt the years of grief in the room slowly uncoil, a knot loosening as the dogs howled softly beneath the stars. In the quiet that followed, the snow seemed to pause, as if the night itself held its breath. 15 shadows lingered around the girl who had nowhere else to go, guarding not just a child, but a fragile piece of a broken heart. And somewhere deep inside, Silas whispered a prayer for the night to hold them both, to keep the silence from swallowing their stories whole. The world outside moved on, but here, in the hush of winter's embrace, a quiet miracle began to bloom. The circle was complete. The waiting had ended, and the story, whispered through snow and shadow, was only just beginning. The dawn crept slowly over the horizon, pale and hesitant like a promise whispered through frost. Inside the police station's dimly lit office, Ilara traced circles on a scrap of paper, her fingers stained with cold and hope. The sketch she made was simple yet haunting, a profile of a dog, strong and solemn, with eyes that seemed to hold stories of distant days and silent nights. Koda, she whispered, the name tasting like memory on her tongue. It was a name that sent a shiver through the room, stirring dust-covered secrets buried beneath years of winter's shadow. Captain Silas Vale looked on, his voice caught between disbelief and something heavier, recognition. He leaned closer, his breath fogging the window pane beside them. "That was Rowan's dog," he said softly, his gaze distant yet sharp. Rowan Wren, his partner from years long past, had vanished in the line of duty, leaving behind only echoes and an ache that never quite healed. The weight of that loss settled again, this time carried by a child who wore silence like a second skin. Miriam Thorne stood nearby, arms crossed, skepticism etched deep in her furrowed brow. But even she could not deny the strange pull that tugged at the edges of reason. Ilara's quiet strength was woven from threads of survival and loss, and the way Koda's name stirred the air made the impossible feel just within reach. The room hummed with the tension of secrets waiting to be unveiled, as outside the winter storm began to gather its breath, blotting out the world in swirling white. Suddenly, a piercing howl shattered the fragile comma sound that rose like a plea from the depths of the earth. The dogs in the kennel broke into frantic barking, their instincts unleashed and wild beneath the shaking sky. Silas exchanged a glance with Miriam, understanding dawning like a flicker of lightning. Ilara was gone. Panic crept into the edges of the station as the blizzard swallowed sound and sight alike. The ground outside vanished beneath the relentless snow, a merciless tide erasing footprints and hiding the fragile trail of a child running toward an unknown refuge. But the dogs, those loyal sentinels, were already moving, their bodies cutting through the white with fierce purpose. Guided by the ancient bond that tethered them to the girl and to the past, Silas threw on his coat and sprinted into the storm, heart pounding in rhythm with the pounding paws behind him. Every step was a battle against the biting wind, every breath a struggle through the frozen air. The world was reduced to the howl of the wind, the crack of breaking ice, and the relentless determination of those who would not let the night swallow what little light remained. Through the swirling chaos, Silas caught sight of a shape crumpled beneath a snow-laden branch, fragile and small. Coda stood sentinel nearby, his body pressed low against the ground, eyes fierce but weary. Ilara lay half-buried, the blanket torn and soaked, but her chest rose and fell with stubborn life. The puppy nestled against her, a fragile pulse of warmth in the cold grave the storm had made. Silas dropped to his knees, fingers trembling as they brushed the snow from her face. "Hold on, little one," he whispered, voice rough with frozen fear and hope entwined. The dogs formed a circle around them, a living barrier against the storm's fury. Their breaths steaming in the biting air, tails curled protectively. The howling was no longer a warning, but a song, ancient and sacred a vow to guard what was precious and broken. The rescue was slow and grueling, the cold seeping into Silas's bones even as adrenaline pushed him forward. He dug with bare hands, each handful of snow a battle against time. The world seemed to hold its breath as the fragile line between life and loss wavered in the grip of winter's relentless hand. When Ilara's small fingers finally closed around his, the storm seemed to shudder, and Coda's last breath slipped into the night, a sigh heavy with sacrifice and love. The old dog collapsed, his noble frame folding into the snow as if returning to the earth that had borne his loyalty. Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, warm and silent, as she pressed her cheek against his fur. In that moment, grief and gratitude tangled into a quiet blessing whispered beneath the winter stars. Silas lifted her gently, carrying her through the white silence, guided by the watchful eyes of the remaining dogs. The way back was slow, marked by snow-dusted footprints and a fragile hope that bloomed in the freezing air. Each step was a vow, just to protect this child, but to honor the ghosts that had led them here. Days passed like a fragile dream, the storm retreating and leaving the world washed clean and pale under the gentle touch of spring's first light. The station was quiet now, filled with the soft murmur of healing and unspoken promises. Coda was laid to rest beneath the training field, the earth soft and welcoming beneath the rising sun. A simple stone marked the place, etched with the name of a dog who had guarded more than just a child. He had guarded a broken heart waiting to be mended. Ilara stood beside the other dogs, her small hand resting on the fur of a younger shepherd. The weight of loss still lingered in her eyes, but so did something new of fragile dignity woven from survival and the quiet grace of those who had refused to let her go. Silas watched, a gentle smile breaking through the lines of his grief, knowing that this night of whispered tales had brought something precious back to life. Outside, the world held its breath once more, the snow melting to reveal twin sets of footprints side by side, one small and tentative, the other deep and sure. The journey was far from over, but here, in the fading light, a promise was made, a promise that no child would ever be forgotten, no heart left unheard. The whisperer's voice returned softly, as if carried on the breeze itself. We tell these stories not because they are easy, but because they remind us that love, like the snow, can cover the darkest places until the dawn comes. Listen closely, for sometimes it is in the quietest moments that we find our truest strength. And with that, the night yields to morning, and the tale lingers waiting to be whispered again. If this story touched something quiet inside you, let it stay a while and whisper it forward. Subscribe for more tales the world almost forgot.